my revised position on Daniel Dennett's third-person absolutism. Some readers may believe that it's a little conceited, or at least needlessly autobiographical, to refer back to, and even quote from, my Chalmers Naturalistic Dualism versus Dennett's third-person absolutism. However, my previous stance on Daniel Dennett's third-person absolutism, alongside my revised stance on the same subject, may be informative. After all, reading both a critical and a positive stance on the same position is always helpful in philosophy. Thus, reading both critical and positive stance on the same position from the very same person, if at different times, may be helpful too. It doesn't help, or perhaps it does, that the American philosopher Daniel Dennett once referred to his own position as third-person absolutism. Did Dennett actually use these words? See Note 1. That said, wouldn't a genuine absolutist stay well clear away from advertising the fact that he is one? In other words, perhaps Dennett was simply being ironic and rhetorical when he used that self-description. Sure, perhaps he was being serious too. Consciousness explained away? Many philosophers and commentators have been very keen to tell us, and they've done so many times, that Dennett's book Consciousness Explained should really have been called Consciousness Explained Away or Consciousness Ignored. The Australian philosopher David Chalmers didn't go that far. However, he did say that what he calls type A materialists see here believe that there is not even a distinct question of consciousness. Once we know about the functions that a system performs, we thereby know everything interesting there is to know. According to Chalmers, then, Dennett fits the description above. Yet when you read Dennett, at least in different passages and at different times, he doesn't deny consciousness at all. Instead, he simply has his own particular take on it. Of course, to some, even many people, Dennett's particular take does still explain consciousness away. The American philosopher John Searle, for example, had the following to say on this matter. To put it as clearly as I can, in his book Non-Consciousness Explained, Dennett denies the existence of consciousness. He continues to use the word, but he means something different by it. For him, it refers only to third-person phenomena, not to the first-person conscious feelings and experiences we all have. As stated, Chalmers, perhaps unlike Searle, doesn't state that Dennett denies consciousness outright. Instead, he tells us that Dennett believes that the sum of mind-brain functions, behavior, verbal reports, see here, etc., are what constitute consciousness. In Chalmers' own words, when it comes to Dennett's position, there is no interesting fact about the mind, conceptually distinct from the functional facts, that needs to be accommodated in our theories. In a previous essay, I too had an absolutist take on the correct definition of the word consciousness. Alternatively, I had an absolutist take on what consciousness is. For example, I wrote, isn't Dennett's position like someone saying that God exists? And then it turns out that what he means by the word God is the ghost who lives at the bottom of my garden. So, according to some definitions of consciousness, it can be argued that Dennett would say that conscious does not exist. However, according to his own definition, as mentioned by Chalmers above, consciousness does exist. Thus, perhaps we're left with a situation in which consciousness exists according to some definitions of the word consciousness, but not others. So now take those philosophers and lay people who stress how things feel or how things seem, and/or fundamental and rudimentary qualia. Most of these people would deem it ridiculous to say that definitions have anything to do with these matters. But definitions, and the technical terms we use, do have a lot to do with the matter of consciousness. After all, it's not those, to use Philip Goff's words, private seemings which are the problem, but what we say about them. More relevantly, it's how we philosophize and theorize about them. Indeed, it's also about how reading books about consciousness, or seeing the word qualia all the time, may influence what we say about consciousness. Patricia Churchland once said that the word qualia is a term of art, which was introduced by philosophers. The English philosopher Philip Goff has also used the following statement: a fair amount of times, consciousness is a datum in its own right. Now, how does that datum stand within the context of all the books and papers Goff and others have read on the subject of consciousness? What's more, can any distinction at all be made between such a supposed datum and all the books or theories each philosopher and layperson has read about it? So, if some readers have read loads of books on consciousness or read the word qualia many times, then surely that will impact on how they describe and/or theorize about any ostensibly private seemings they may have. See Paul Churchland's position on a related theme in Note 2. Chalmers on Dennett's third-person absolutism. My previous criticisms of Daniel Dennett's third-person absolutism were perhaps a little too dependent on David Chalmers' own. That said, I did have problems with Dennett's positions before looking into what Chalmers, particularly, had to say on the matter. Chalmers expressed Dennett's functionalist absolutism by citing the following examples. It is far from obvious that even all the items on Dennett's list, feelings of foreboding, fantasies, delight, and dismay, are purely functional matters. One's ability to be moved to tears and blithe disregard of perceptual details are striking phenomena, but they are far from the most obvious phenomena that I, at least, find when I introspect. One of my own responses to this passage from Chalmers was this: prima facie, it does seem amazing that Dennett sees such things as solely functional matters. I then added the following words: it's hard to understand what it could mean to say that the ability to be moved to tears is a purely functional matter. What's with the word ability, yet it now seems that it's not that there aren't any private seemings, but that we can't do anything with them. That in itself isn't to deny the seemings or the privacy. After all, if the reader thinks to himself a certain thought, say that elephants are pink and eat marbles, then there's no way that Dennett, or every scientist on the planet in a group effort, could guess what he or she is thinking. Thus, isn't that particular thought private? Chalmers also defined Dennett's position as the view that what is not externally verifiable cannot be real. It can be presumed that Chalmers was arguing that Dennett's position is that there must be a fundamental as well as theoretical connection between any X being real or existing, and whether or not we can externally verify it. On this reading of Dennett, then, if we can't externally verify X, then it doesn't exist. It's not real. Thus, perhaps the aforementioned thought about pink elephants isn't real. Yet one wonders if Dennett actually used the word real in this context. Sure, he would have certainly emphasized external verifiability. However, the word real seems like Chalmers' own personal addition. As for Dennett's own responses to Chalmers' criticisms, it's not surprising that Dennett asked Chalmers, at least according to Chalmers himself, to provide independent evidence, presumably behavioral or functional evidence, for the postulation of experience. That passage neatly expresses Dennett's supposed third-person absolutism. Such a position, according to Chalmers, allows and encourages a third-person perspective on one's first-person perspective. This is an articulation of Dennett's heterophenomenology, yet Dennett simply seems to be advancing a scientific position on the subject of consciousness. So where is the absolutism in that? After all, because Dennett is attempting to make the study of consciousness scientific, then sure, we can go with Chalmers when he said that, in Dennett, as consciousness explained heterophenomenology, like Quine's position on overt behavior when it came to meaning, is deemed to be the central source of data. In a sense, it can't be anything else but the main, or even only, source of data. Surely the alternative is taking the words about consciousness, qualia, etc., of all subjects to be gospel. Yet what if such subjects contradict each other on these matters? Chalmers also tells us that the only seemings that need explaining are dispositions to react and report. Again, this is Dennett's attempt to make the subject of consciousness scientific. That's primarily because even though there are very many philosophical, purely phenomenological, and religious or spiritual accounts of consciousness, these accounts are still endlessly disputed and of no help to scientists.